Hello, welcome back. I'm happy you're here. It really means you sticking to this and you really do want to learn. It's my pleasure to share with you the little I know, and I hope at the end of this course you become more proficient to write good macros that you can execute to perform your desired task. In preparing you for that, something I just mentioned was your desired task. So that means you would have something in mind that you want the computer to do. You would have a set of instructions that you want the computer to execute, and those things are what are all embedded in a sub, which we kind of looked at in just in passing, where I mentioned a sub, you'd always be either running the sub or you're trying to use the user form or some other element which you're going to see in more detail. However, things I just want to just draw to your attention is you want to perform set of tasks, so you're basically laying out instructions for the computer to execute where you'll be passing values, right? You'll be passing values. Now, while we used to working with the Excel application, as it were, you had normal values. So this is what a, a word, this is a number, this is also a number, and they are stored in here they're stored as car these numbers are stored as car IDs, these stored as a brand, you have prices, you have mileage, you also have values for year, and they're stored as year. Okay, just stay with me on this. What you're doing there is you're storing up values um, within a placeholder to bring it into the context of the Visual Basic Editor. And I'm trying not to use the word programming, but that is where we are right now. You're coding all of these things, and so coding is not just restricted to writing codes like this. And people say, "Hey, you're a software programmer." It's essentially just, if you think about it from our younger years, where things are encoded. So you have classrooms. Say, oh, for classrooms, you have classroom A, classroom B, and classroom A perhaps represents females and classroom B could represent male, and you have another category to represent um, a blend of both males and females. Those are already things that you're coding those things. Okay, so you're not just expressing them in direct form, but you're kind of packing them up into something, and that is a way of describing coding. Okay, so depending on the context, of course, in some other context, this definition um, wouldn't be applicable. All right, but now within our context of coding things, coding values, passing values to the computer would have these values to be stored. And so how do you store them? You store them as variables. So I'm just going to hit enter here, so we could just have a line, for us to work with, and I'm going to create a sub of our own. I'm just going to call these variables here. All right, and now if I should just take this up a bit, so I have end sub and indenting in here, we're going to understand this a bit more. So we're storing values. Now to store a value, just as you saw in that default, in the default Excel application here, which I'm just going to toggle back so you can see this. This is what you're familiar with. All these are values here, but they are stored as car IDs. Okay, so we have these different brands of cars. They are stored under the brand, under brands. So you have Toyota, Kia, you name it. They are stored as a brand. Okay. Similarly for all values. So what we've been referring to as column headers. Okay, that is where that value is passed, is stored. So you could say a variable, is where you store a value, and the a value, typically a value, I want to say data, but that's what it is. However, the data, if you look back at this, has different types. So for the car ID, we're seeing numbers. For the brands, we're seeing not numbers, we're seeing text. These are words. Under the year, we're saying that these values is not just a normal number. Okay, so there are different types of data or variable types, data types. I would like to express them in major categories, and then we start going, into more detail, which I would also employ you to get into. So from what I've just shared now, well, I'm going to categorize about three or four major categories. The first one is numbers as a data type. So we have numbers, okay? Numbers. The next is we have text. So the words, just as we saw there. So we under the ID, we're saying one, two, numbers. And then under the brand, we're saying Toyota, Kia. You think of any brand, a name. So text, a name. And if you think about, and if you recall, while you're working with Excel, you have numbers, you have text, and then there is a Boolean category. So the Boolean typically just expresses or is able to accommodate two types. It's either something is true or something is false. Okay, so we have what now? Numbers. We have text. I said Boolean, true, false. I'm also going to throw in another one for date and time. So date and time data types. I had wanted to just push it up with the numbers, but I'm just going to just have that distinction to say date and time. Now let's go a bit further into the numbers bit there. Numbers, there are different types of numbers. Okay. Now what do I mean by there are different types of numbers? One is a number, 10 is a number, 10.4 is a number, 2.03 is a number. But the difference is that 10 is a whole number, right? That's the commonest way of expressing it or describing it. 2.04 is a decimal number, so it has two decimal points. Now, there's a way the computer interprets this for the VBA. So, remember, we're talking about coding all of this. So, the VBA way of coding this is you have to specify the type of number you're dealing with here. Is it as a whole number? Is it as a decimal number? Now there are different, there are also other categories, where I'm saying whole number, decimal number, and other number types. But I'm just going into more popular types of numbers. So there are conventions when you also want to pass or store a value or a data type. For the application, for the VBA application, the first thing you have to impute in there is the keyword dim. To store a value, a data type, for the VBA application, we need to use certain conventions because we're now working with a way of coding these things. Think about it as a language. Now I'm expressing this in English language. Okay, if you're not a native English speaker and you had to learn the English language, or you recall while you were learning the English language, there are certain things that um, are recommended in terms of expressing English language in writing. The first character, the first letter should be in uppercase, or it should be in uppercase. That's what should be in uppercase. Okay. If it's a noun, the first letter of a noun should be also be in uppercase. So there are some conventions that you have to follow if you're trying to even speak a language or trying to communicate in a language. Similarly, for the VBA, we're expressing ourselves through the language to the computer, and so there are some conventions that we also have to follow. You would also see this if you also get to learn other languages. So for this, to start off with a variable, you have to use the keyword dim, D-I-M. Okay, it's actually an abbreviation for the word dimension. Next up is to specify the name of the variable. So I'm just going to say numero. This is just for demonstrative purposes. Okay, numero. Now what do I want to store numero as? Okay, I'm saying let it be a number. So what kind of number? An integer number. And so see, IntelliSense is helping me even complete that bit. I hit enter and it helps me, format this properly. The dim is supposed to be, uppercase, being the first character, and all of this other bit here. If you can notice something on my screen, you see that some text uh have a different font color. Okay, now think of it in the context that this different color, those ones that have blue, are keywords, right? So keywords, things that you should that have priority in the application. So the sub, the sub, the word end, the word dim, the word as, and then integer. So integer being a number type, and it's typically for like a whole number. So like a 10, a 14. Now if we're going to have a decimal, a number with decimal points, okay, I'm just going to say number two as. So for decimal points, we have double. Okay. Now I know this because I've also spent some time with the application. What I would employ you to do, just a little activity is to look up what are the different types of numerical data types on the VB application. And then for the non-numerical types, where I mentioned for text, so like we had for the Toyota, so I'm just going to say brand, okay, I'm going to say as, and I'm going to call this, or what the popular bit have is string, as a string. So string, it can take text. So a text is not just letters, it could also have numbers embedded in it. So basically alphanumeric, but it's easier for me to tell you it's a text. Okay, it's good that you just keep this in mind. If I was to store for the date, okay, and I wanted to say yay as, what do you think would be the value I'm supposed to store yay as? I'll leave that to your imagination so you can fill this up as we move on to the next bit. Okay, all right, well done. You got it right. Good job. If you didn't, it's a good time to just look into it, try to see how you can try to figure something out about it. Something I recently stumbled on, a movie I was seeing just before coming up here. A coach, kind of like a coach. Yeah, I mentored to this other person, and they were they were playing basketball. So he misses a shot, and I like what the coach says. Rather than drop the shoulder, he just says, um, I'm paraphrasing, don't worry about this shot, it's not the shot I'm bothered about, it's gone. I want you to focus on the most important shot, which is the next shot. I said that just to say that if you didn't get this value, which was just to say that's a date, don't get beat up on it. Just focus on the next activity and see how you can do better in the next activity. See how you can grasp the next concept that is going to be shared, and you just keep focusing on the next one and try to better your previous mistakes. All right. So back into it. What's the next thing I wanted to talk about? Beyond how to store your data as variables. The next is control structures. All right. So the concept of control structures is basically it's like the building block on which your entire code, so your entire code here, meaning the set of instructions that you want the computer to execute for you. Okay, control structure determines how that is executed. So to move away from the technical jargon, from it, the control structure is basically trying to say, hey, if this pen is black, make the board white. Okay, and that would make sense so that whatever is scribbled on with the pen would be more visible. Okay, that's like that's a practical way of just thinking of things, and that's what you do with control structure. And there are different ways of involving this. One popular thing that we use, up until this time you perhaps didn't think of it in this way. With the default Excel application, when we write our formulas, especially the if formulas, okay, those conditional statements, conditional functions that we write, the if, the and, the or, and as many as you can think of, that is a typical example of control structure, of your code there, of object-oriented programming. And so a typical case will be when we write our if functions. Now, before we have to write it, equals to symbol, but here we just specify. So if I'm to say if numero, right, is 2, for instance, then what do I want to happen if it's 2? Do I want it changed? Do I want the value of numero to be something else, a numero multiplied by 2? Is that what I want? This, it's a typical instance of control structure, writing an if block. All right, so this is just a teaser of what control structure looks like. In the next bit, we're going to get deeper into control structures. Of course, to work with that, we're going to see how we use the variables that we've created and look a bit more, the if statements. We're going to look at another conditional statement for control structure and get a bit deeper into control structures. So try to digest what you've just listened to, and I'll see you in the next model. Bye for now.